Good morning from this beautiful Sunday in Madrid, in the Madrid Book Fair. Today we had the privilege and the fortune and the good luck to have Catriona Award with us. Thank you so much. I know that you just flew in a couple days ago.
Yeah, I did. Thank you so much for having me. It's my second time in Madrid, and it gets more beautiful each time, I think. Yeah.
Has it been busy? You have a few book signings, right?
Yes, I did a wonderful event yesterday with the ever charming Virginia Feto, which was great, and I've done some signings, and yeah, it's been packed. Yeah.
Are you going back soon, or are you staying with us for a while?
Unfortunately, I'm off to Barcelona this evening to do an event at the Gilgamesh bookstore, and do some meeting with the readers. And then back to London on Monday. It's sad, it's too short.
Well, we're thrilled to be promoting Sundial on this visit and on this trip with you.
Thank you.
It's been a fantastic couple of years for you, but I know that things were kind of rocky. I mean, you started 2021 with just a very difficult event with your partner, with Ed.
Yes. He's doing really well now. Yes, he had this very frightening. It happened on my birthday as well, which is a very sort of momentous time for anything to start like that. He just suddenly said, "I can't feel my legs," and it's an autoimmune disease whereby the nerve endings are eaten by your immune system. Guillain-Barré syndrome, yes.
So they said in the hospital they only get it once a year.
Once a year in the whole of in the whole of Greater London, there's like one case a year. But it was very frightening because the paralysis moved up and up and up, and nobody knew what it was. And he recovered really well. We're very lucky, but he had to learn to walk again, and that proved, it was very much a baptism of fire, really. Because seeing someone you love suffer like that is horrible. And they're frightened, and you're frightened. And
it was fascinating to see how, because you're both writers, and yet you managed to make an incredible piece out of it, because you wrote an article on how you both the point of view of each one of you through the same experience, and it really shows you how how novels get crafted, different points of view on the same event.
I found it really interesting because until we had time to talk about it later, I had no consciousness or awareness of how different his perception of what happened was. We were walking past the hospital where he was for some of the time, and I said, I used to come and see you every day in here, and he said, was I there? He had very little knowledge of where he was at any given time. And our two experiences were just so different. And I think we both found that as writers, because writers are sort of monstrous, really. We just consume all of our experience and regurgitate it as story. We suddenly decided that it would be really interesting to look at those two stories and how they intersect. And it was quite sort of an emotional thing to revisit for we wrote not the article for the Times, as you say, about it, and it's emotional to revisit, but quite cathartic as well, I think, in the end.
Is he fine? Is he back to normal now?
He's really well. He's absolutely normal. We've been very lucky. He does everything a real live boy does now.
Fantastic. So I have the awards here because I don't want to leave any, but you had an incredible couple of years. Starting, of course, you won in 2006 the British Fantasy Award, 2019 the Shirley Jackson Award, 2022 the British Book Awards, again the British Fantasy Award, which made you the first woman to win that award twice.
And then 3 times.
And 3 times. Yes. And the Goodreads Choice Award, that's right here in the next year. Kiss Cheese, Ladies of Horror Fiction, Southbank Sky Arts Award, a lot of them for The Last House of Needless Street, Goodreads Choice Award again, and 2023 the Bram Stoker Award for Sundial as well, and the ITW. Yeah. You really, this has been a breakaway season for you.
Yeah.
You did not start your career as a writer. You started as an actor.
Yes.
You were reading. Do you wonder? Do you wish that you started sooner, or do you think that it took this much time to brew the writer that there is in you now? Because it's been a very, very quick success. How do you feel about that?
It's a really good question, because I think one always wonders, if one should have identified earlier the path forward. But I think most people, on a very simple level, I think most people spend their 20s figuring that out anyway. I certainly did. And I also think that time spent as a very unsuccessful, may I add, actor, so unsuccessful, was really useful in terms of, I think what I was always attracted to was story. and I think acting was another form of storytelling. And the tools I learned in that craft, actually, I think I still use today. I definitely use them for building character. And actors score their scripts almost like a piece of music, and I definitely still build scenes like that as like an actor would. And I think a lot of my books are kind of they're written almost like voices from the dark. Like monologues, and I think that's definitely a residual aspect of my acting life. Is that's how I feel comfortable? Is this sort of speaking from from inside a character.
We were talking earlier about how traveling kind of changes your perspective on things. And again, I had to write this thing. You were born in Washington D.C. You lived all over the U.S., Kenya, Madagascar, Yemen, Morocco, and Darfur, which is where you spend most of your time. Do you think that traveling so much gives you a different perspective on life or on any events? I mean, has it shaped your career as a writer to be from so many places?
I think so. I mean, there's several things spring to mind about this, which is, first of all, it was before the internet, so we moved every 3 years. And if you move from Kenya to Madagascar, there's absolutely no way you can take friends with you. You have to relearn a completely different environment every 3 years. And it also means that you don't have that solid basis and knowledge about yourself, like that defining thing of where am I from. And I also think, I know that it could, while I'm incredibly grateful for my upbringing, I think it was amazing, it was also quite lonely. It was a lonely childhood. And as we all know, lonely children make great writers. But it also makes you incredibly reliant on your family, and because your family are everything. They are your every comfort, they fulfill all your social needs, your emotional needs, and they're the only constant. They're the only people who know where you've been, and the only people who have context for you. So it's a very nurturing thing, but also as a writer of the dark kind of fiction, it also makes you, when I turn to address family in my work, I always like to look at that point where nurture becomes need, and perhaps it can become an oppressive thing. It can be an oppressive thing to need, for people so much, and for them to need you.
And those are the themes that you touch in Sundial. You explore the bond between a mother and a daughter. You explore the open skies or the open lands of Mojave Desert as perhaps not as a liberating theme, but as a prison. How do you think about how did this story come to be?
Well, so I just finished The Last House on Needless Street, which is very much about isolation and about, it's very centered on a male protagonist. And I really wanted to do something to do with women and female relationships, and family, mothers, daughters, sisters. And because I think it can be tempting in popular culture to make these relationships pretty, acceptable, and make them kind of, sweet. I don't know that they are necessarily sweet. I think
that's what you mentioned.
Yeah.
Who hasn't dreamed of murdering a family member and getting away with it?
It's very relatable. But I also think that, the strength and this almost feral nature of that bond is, it's part of its resilience. I also think there was this connecting tissue as well with the setting of the Mojave, because the savagery of both of these things seem to call to each other. I mean, I went to the Mojave as well, which it was kind of what kick-started the idea of setting the novel there. It's extraordinary. I'm sure, have you been? You expect it to be quiet, but it's loud. There's so much life in this seemingly dead land. And what really struck me about it is how it looks like this vast expanse of freedom, but actually what it is a big cage. Because you can't, in Sundial, for instance, the mother and the daughter are at the house, Sundial, and they can't really leave, because if you go more than a certain distance into that great wilderness, you die. It's like it's a strange paradox.
there are great chunks of the border, the U.S.-Mexico border, where the wall is the desert itself. There is no wall because if you dare come across, I mean that's all. So it is. I mean it's and in the novel you also explore. I guess that I know that you don't like particularly horror movies because the slashers they just kind of surprise you. You're watching something else and here's some blood splatter. I hear you explore horror as more of a psychological condition, as a more of the monsters that we all carry inside. I know that you spoke also about how we create some myths, the myths of the boogeyman or these things that are to just kind of take our lack of humanity on put it on some other external character. But you kind of touch on the idea that perhaps that is inside all of us, and we just put it out as a way to make us
exactly. I mean, I think what's more frightening than meeting the monster is becoming one. And because, I don't think a monster, you wake up one day and there's a click and you've suddenly become a monster. I think that you perhaps walk quite a long way down the path without knowing about it. It's only when you turn back and look how far you've come that you realize that you are one. I do think there's an inherent horror in being alive, really, which is sort of what these books are about. It's these, even love, there's such a close relationship between love and horror because you're so vulnerable, you're so at risk. And horror for me is always predicated on empathy. You feel what you feel. You can't be made to fear where you don't care.
We mentioned earlier about how traveling kind of crafted your career as a writer. I know that one of the conditions you suffered too when you were young was hypnagogic hallucinations, which are these semi-real hallucinations or dreams that you have when you're falling asleep and not quite there. And I know that you described the sensation of this hand touching you, and then you read Monkey's Paw.
Yes,
and then
exactly.
You thought, hey, this is my thing.
This is
Tell us more.
exactly. So the one constant we had in this moving around was this house in Devon we used to go back to every summer, and when I was about 13, I started to wake up with this hand in the small of my back pushing me out of bed. I used to fall on the floor. It felt very real, and I could feel every finger on the hand, and several things. In retrospect, I always question about this experience. One is because I used to go and sleep in my sister's room, but I never told my parents.
It's very scary for you. I mean, when do you realize that they were dreams or they were hallucinations? Because at the beginning you must have thought it was real.
For a long time. Again, pre-Google, and by the time it was kind of, we figured out what it was. I was in my 20s. But what was the scary thing was because after we left that house, it kept happening. So the only logical conclusion was that it wasn't the house that was haunted; it was me. I was haunted, and there's something incredibly strange about having this sort of deep conviction that there's something within you that you carry around that makes that some kind of supernatural aspect. And it was just very frightening as well. I'm still quite scared of the dark. I think it's, even though I know what it is now, and it's all kind of explicable. There's nothing like the fear you feel in the dark, is there? It's very different to all our daytime fears. And when I started writing, I suddenly realized that that feeling can be contained by words. You build a cage to contain. You can contain the demon with a cage of words, and I think that's a really powerful thing. Because we're not that interested in fear in art, really. We're not interested in horror is the only genre that deals with fear as its motivating factor and is interested in interrogating it. And because we're ashamed of fear, we're embarrassed of it. It's a kid's thing. We're not supposed to feel it. That's why I think it's such an interesting and kind of profound way of asking questions about who we are.
It's fascinating. One of the things that you also touch on is this connection that you're describing, the fear.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk about how motherhood is something scary in itself.
Yeah.
And you touch on briefly in a few interviews about how you said earlier you don't like horror movies, and you don't necessarily read a lot of horror.
Yeah.
But you feel that when you write, that there's an inherent pact between the reader
Yes.
and the writer, that you can go on your own pace, or you can
Yeah,
imagine things
yeah.
as exciting or extreme or bland as you want. I mean, tell
I
me
think
more
I
about
only
that.
write half. I only write half the book. So I write my part. Without a reader, a book is just an object. And so the book comes into being, I think, in that meeting place between the reader's experience and what you put on the page. And I think there's a sort of element of almost like participation in that, whereby the reader is allowed to control their engagement with it. And I think that's a different mechanism than with horror films. I mean, I also do think that all good writing inherently contains some horror, especially comedy. Comedy is full of horror. You know, there's that saying that comedy is just tragedy sped up by 50 RPMs.
Unexpected situations of a different kind. It's really,
Exactly.
they're very similar in
I mean,
genre.
hit someone with a baseball
Yeah.
bat, to one soundtrack,
Yeah,
and it's horror.
Yeah.
Hit it to a jolly, Groucho Marx soundtrack, and it's comedy. It's
You recently had your book, The Last House on Endless Street, on Needless Street, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
optioned by Andy Serkis and Jonathan Cavendish's production company, Imagineering. That's the last, I guess that's the ultimate thrill for an author, to see their
Yeah.
creation taken from the book, from the pages of the book,
Yeah.
to the big screen. How is that process going? I mean, has it been...
Well, it's wonderful. I'm very lucky with them, actually. You know, as you may know, most most producers and production companies' main objective when they option a book is to keep the writer as far away from the process as possible. But they're not like that at all. They see value and seem to be, actually actively want me to be engaged and with like input, like an executive producer. I'm helping work on this, develop the script, and it's really a huge leap of faith on their part that they seem to welcome that engagement. I think because I think some writers do find it strange that leap from one medium to another, and because you can't possibly reproduce what's on the page into film.
We were talking with a fan earlier.
Yeah.
And you were commenting on how pleasant it is to go to a different country, different language, and still see somebody that has read your book and just this
Yes.
weird feeling. It's like, oh wow, you read my book.
I know.
That's when it becomes a movie. It takes on a life of its own. I mean, this thing is kind of not your baby anymore.
That's right.
Is this a feeling of relief as a creator, or are you concerned that maybe it's not going to be exactly what I had in mind at the beginning?
Oh, it'll never be exactly what I had in mind at the beginning. But what it will be, I hope, is the same soul, the same heart, but told with different tools. I think that a lot of really great adaptations kind of take the spirit of something and you feel like you recognize the work and when you watch it, even though actually the stories can be quite adjusted for the needs of a new medium. I think you can have the same book rendered on the screen, but with actually some quite significant kind of adjustments and changes. I hope, anyway. I mean, the main thing is I think that it's very character driven, and as long as you feel those voices speaking, I think it'll feel like the same book.
Well, Sundial is being a smashing success. For those of us who are following your work and are excited, what's next for Catriona Ward? What are you working on?
Well, I have a book. I just published a book in the UK called Looking Glass Sound, which is, and I believe it comes out here in October, I believe. And it's sort of my love letter to those early novels of Stephen King. Stephen King was very kind about The Last House on Needle Street and about Sundial. And I think he's in every horror writer's DNA. It's those books, particularly. He's so good at telling stories about that coming of age and those first friendships. So Looking Glass Sound is set in Maine, on the coast of Maine. Stephen King's setting, it's Stephen King land. And about a friendship between three teenagers whereby they make they're part of a terrible discovery, and how that discovery ricochets down through their lives. And all of them try and tell the story in a different way. And Wilder, our protagonist, tries to tell it through writing a novel about it, like a memoir. And it becomes a story about writers, and there's always a risk with writing about writers, isn't there, that you become sort of like so navel gazing. But I think it's about trauma and who owns it, and who owns experience. And there's a lot of magic and a lot of broad, beautiful seascape, and just the wildness of that part of the country. And it's also about love. I think in the first line, Wilder says, "I plan on falling in love this summer," and he spends all his time looking for that love. And I think writing books and love are almost a kind of a similar exercise, in that you're looking for this great romantic rush of perfection. And
we will be looking forward to that one when it comes out. The book is Sundial, Catriona Award. Thank you guys, and good afternoon from Madrid. Thank you, Catriona.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.